My name was Hadrian Voss. I was 42 years old. I worked Press Station 7 Gamma in the Manufactorum on Salvaris Hive, sub-level 219. I had a father whose hands were scarred from 40 years at the same press. I had a son I loved more than the rhythm of the machines, and I was the first to be kissed, the first to be infected, the first to carry the Xeno's genetic payload that would corrupt my bloodline across 4 generations. The first to damn everyone I loved to a fate worse than death, to transformation, to communion, to the ecstatic horror of being devoured by something they would worship as divine. Let me tell you how it happened. How the thing in the underhive found me. How the genetic curse spread through my family like a whispered secret, changing us generation by generation until we weren't human anymore. How my great-grandchildren waited in the darkness with purple skin and extra arms and elongated skulls, praying to gods that were really just hungry aliens. How the hive fleet finally came, and how they greeted their consumption with joy. Let me tell you how faith became infection, how love became contamination, and how 4 generations of my blood were transformed into offerings for something that didn't protect us. It just wanted to feed. The smell of industrial lubricant never leaves you once you've worked the presses. It gets into your pores, into your clothes, into the air you breathe until you can't remember what clean air smells like anymore. 14 hours a shift, 6 days a week. My hands feeding raw plasteel sheets into Press 7 Gamma, while the machine stamped them into hull plating for Navy frigates I'd never see, destined for wars I'd never understand. I was 42 years old when the thing found me. 42 years of the same routine, wake at 0400 hours, consume corpse starch rations, descend 219 sub-level via cargo elevator, work until 1800 hours, ascend, sleep, repeat. The administratum called it service. The overseers called it duty. I called it existence because what else was there to call a life spent feeding metal into machines while your bodies slowly wore down into replacement parts? But I had my son, Marcus. He was 16, still young enough that the Manufactorum hadn't completely broken his spirit, still capable of questions that I'd stopped asking decades ago. He worked Press 12 Delta, 3 stations down from mine, and during the brief meal breaks we'd sit together on the ferrocrete floor and I'd tell him about my father. His name was Hadrian too. I'd been named for him, as was tradition in families whose only legacy was a workstation number passed from father to son. My father had worked Press 7 Gamma for 43 years before his heart gave out mid-shift, his body crumpling against the machine while the press continued its rhythmic stamping, indifferent to his death. They'd pulled his corpse out during the shift change, assigned me his station the next day. Efficiency, they called it. The Imperium wasted nothing, not even grief. Did grandfather ever talk about before? Marcus asked me once, his young face streaked with machine oil, his hands already developing the calluses that would never fully heal. Before the Manufactorum. I shook my head. There was no before. He was born in the workers' barracks, sub-level 223, selected for Manufactorum service at age 12, worked until he died. I looked at my own scarred hands. Same as me, same as you, Will. The preachers say we're blessed, Marcus said, but there was doubt in his voice. They say the Emperor protects those who serve faithfully, that our labor is sacred. I'd heard the preachers too, ecclesiarchy. Priests who descended to the sub-levels once a month to deliver sermons about duty and divine purpose, about how our suffering served the God Emperor's grand design. They spoke of protection and salvation while we stood in ranks, our bodies aching, our futures predetermined, our lives measured in production quotas rather than years. The preachers say many things, I replied carefully, because questioning the imperial creed could earn you a visit from the Arbits. But your grandfather worked faithfully for 43 years, and the machine still killed him. If the Emperor protects, he does so selectively. Marcus said nothing, but I saw the small crack in his certainty, the tiny fissure in the programming we'd all received since birth. The doubt that meant he was still thinking, still human beneath the conditioning. That was 3 weeks before the thing in the underhive found me. The summons came during the night shift, when the manufactorum ran on skeleton crew and the overseers were fewer. A servitor, one of the lobotomized worker drones that handled menial tasks, approached my station with a data slate displaying orders in official administratum script. Worker Hadrian Voss, Station 7-Gamma. Report to sublevel 247 for equipment retrieval. Authorization code Sigma-9-7. I'd never been summoned before. In 24 years of service, I'd never left sublevel 219 except to sleep in the barracks 2 levels up. The manufactorum was our world. We lived, worked, and died within a vertical slice of the hive's industrial complex, never seeing daylight, never knowing anything beyond the rhythm of the machines. But orders were orders. Disobedience meant disciplinary action, which meant reduced rations, which meant weakness, which meant death. So I logged out of my station, informed the shift supervisor, and took the maintenance elevator down into the underhive. Sub-level 247 was 28 levels below my normal depth. The elevator descended for 6 minutes, passing through strata of the hive I'd only heard about in rumors. The water reclamation levels where condensation dripped like perpetual rain. The waste processing sectors where the air turned thick with methane. The condemned zones where ancient collapses had left voids in the hive's structure. The elevator opened onto darkness. Not the dim lighting of the manufactorum, but actual darkness, a depth where the hive's power systems had failed or been shut down, where the only illumination came from the elevator's fading glow and bioluminescent fungi growing in patches on the walls. I stepped out because stepping back would have been disobedience. My work boots splashed in standing water maybe 3 inches deep. And the smell hit me immediately. Rot and mold and something organic that didn't belong in a hive of metal and rockcrete. The elevator doors closed behind me with a hydraulic hiss, and I heard the mechanism ascending, leaving me alone in the dark. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "I was ordered to retrieve equipment. Where is the supply station?" No answer, just the drip of water and my own breathing and the distant sound of something moving through the flooded corridors. I should have been afraid, should have recognized the trap, but I'd been conditioned for obedience, trained to follow orders without questioning, shaped by decades of routine into a tool that functioned as directed. So I walked forward into the darkness, searching for the equipment that didn't exist, following orders that had been designed to lure me exactly where I was going. I found it in what used to be a storage chamber, a vast space filled with corroded machinery and collapsed shelving, everything covered in the thick fungal growth that thrived in the abandoned depths. The water was deeper here, maybe 6 inches, and in the dim, bioluminescent glow, I could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Rats, probably, or some other vermin that infested the Underhive's lowest reaches. Then I saw the body. It was partially submerged, face down in the water, and for a moment I thought it was another worker who'd been sent down here and died. But as I got closer, I realized the proportions were wrong. Too large, too wide at the shoulders, and the skin where it was visible above the waterline wasn't human flesh. It was something else, something purple-tinged and chitinous, something that reflected the bioluminescent light in ways that skin shouldn't. I should have run, should have called for help, should have done anything except what I did, which was lean closer, curiosity overriding instinct, trying to understand what I was seeing. It moved. Not the slow movement of a drowning person, but fast, inhumanly fast, erupting from the water with a screech that echoed in the chamber like metal scraping metal. I saw it clearly then in the moment before it was on me. The body of something that might have been human once but wasn't anymore. The torso swollen with tumorous growths. The arms, too many arms, 4 or 6, I couldn't count, ending in claws that gleamed wet and sharp. But it was the head that I saw most clearly. The elongated skull, the too wide jaw filled with too many teeth, and the third eyes in the center of the forehead, milky white and seeming to stare directly into my soul. It grabbed me. I felt claws pierce my shoulders, felt something else. Smaller appendages, maybe, or tendrils, wrapping around my torso. I opened my mouth to scream, and it lunged forward, its jaw unhinging like a snake's, and I felt something enter my mouth. Not a tongue, but something else, something that moved with purpose and intent, something that forced its way down my throat while I choked and thrashed. The kiss lasted maybe 15 seconds. 15 seconds of violation, of invasion, of something foreign being injected directly into my body. Then it released me, and I collapsed into the water, gasping and retching, feeling the thing inside me moving, settling, finding a home in my genetic code. When I looked up, it was gone. Disappeared into the darkness like it had never been there, leaving me alone in the flooded chamber with the taste of something wrong in my mouth and the absolute certainty that I'd been changed in ways I couldn't yet understand. I made it back to the elevator. I don't remember the journey, just fragments of stumbling through darkness, of my hands finding walls, of the elevator doors opening as if they'd been waiting for me. The ride up felt longer than it should have, and in the enclosed space I could smell myself, the rot and mold stench of the Underhive mixed with something else, something chemical and alien. I reported back to my station, logged back in, resumed feeding metal into Press 7 Gamma. The shift supervisor asked if I'd retrieved the equipment. I said there had been none at the specified location. He made a notation on his data slate and moved on, uninterested in explanations. I worked the rest of my shift in silence, my hands performing their routine tasks while my mind tried to process what had happened. But already I could feel something changing, not physically, not yet, but mentally. Thoughts that weren't entirely mine flickering at the edges of my consciousness. Urges I didn't understand, and beneath it all, a growing certainty that I was no longer entirely human. 3 days later, the dreams started. The dreams weren't visions or nightmares in the traditional sense. They were more like memories. But not my memories. Someone else's thoughts bleeding into my consciousness while I slept, showing me things I'd never seen, places I'd never been, concepts I didn't have words for. I saw tunnels that went deeper than the underhive, extending into the planet's crust like veins through flesh. I saw chambers where hundreds of bodies moved in coordinated patterns, not like workers, but like cells in an organism, each one part of a greater whole. I saw children being born with subtle mutations, extra fingers, unusual skin tones, eyes that reflected light wrong. And I saw the stars, not the dim lights we sometimes glimpsed through hab-block windows, but actual stars, a void filled with points of light, and moving among them something vast, something alive, something hungry that traveled between systems, consuming worlds, reducing populations to biological matter that fed its endless hunger. I woke from these dreams with the taste of something sweet in my mouth, like overripe fruit, and I could feel the thing inside me, nested somewhere in my genetic code, rewriting instructions that had been passed down through countless generations of human ancestry. I told no one. Not Marcus, not the other workers, not even when the physical changes began. It started with my left hand. Around day 20, I noticed the skin between my thumb and forefinger had darkened slightly. Not a bruise, but a subtle purple tinge like blood showing through translucent skin. By day 30, the discoloration had spread to my entire palm. By day 40, I could feel the bones shifting slightly, elongating, the joints becoming more flexible than human anatomy should allow. I hid it under work gloves, told anyone who asked that I'd injured it in the press. No one questioned it. Injuries were common in the manufactorum, and the overseers cared only that you could still work. But the changes didn't stop. By day 50, my fingernails had thickened and hardened, becoming almost claw-like. By day 60, I'd developed a patch of rough, chitinous skin on my left forearm. By day 70, I could feel my shoulder joint restructuring, growing new attachment points for muscles that didn't exist yet. I should have reported to the Medicaid, should have sought help, but the dreams had shown me what happened to people like me. The ones who were discovered, who were identified as infected. They were taken by the Arbits, questioned by the Inquisition, and executed. Not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly, their bodies studied and dissected while they were still alive, because the Imperium's response to Xenos contamination was thorough and absolute. So I hid it. Adapted my movements to conceal the changes, wore long sleeves, avoided physical contact, and told myself I could control it, could stop it, could somehow purge the infection before it consumed me completely. I was wrong. By day 90, my left arm was no longer recognizably human. The hand had elongated into a claw, the fingers too long and ending in sharp points. The forearm was covered in purple-gray chitin that felt like flexible armor. And beneath the skin, I could feel something else. A second structure growing alongside the original bones, a reinforcement that made the arm stronger than it should be. I could still use it, could still work the press. But I had to concentrate. Had to focus on making it move like a human hand rather than the claw it was becoming. The effort was exhausting, and by the end of each shift, I could barely maintain the control needed to keep my co-workers from noticing. Marcus noticed anyway. "Father," he said during a meal break, his young face showing concern that cut through the usual factory apathy. "Your left arm, the way you hold it. Are you injured?" Old wound, I lied, keeping my arm close to my body. It aches in the cold. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But he was a good son, raised to respect his elders, conditioned not to question too deeply. So he nodded and changed the subject, talking about his own workstation, about a girl he'd seen in the Hab block, and I felt a spike of something instinctive, something that wanted to tell him to find her, to breed with her, to continue the bloodline. About small dreams that would never be realized. I listened and hated myself, hated what I was becoming, hated that I would pass this on to him, that my contamination would spread through my bloodline like a disease masquerading as inheritance. The thing inside me had other plans. On day 93, I found myself walking to Marcus's Hab unit during the sleep shift. I don't remember deciding to go. One moment I was in my own quarters, the next I was standing outside his door, my mutated arm extended, knocking with the claw hand I could no longer fully control. He opened the door, saw me clearly in the dim corridor lighting, saw the arm I could no longer hide. His eyes widened, his mouth open to ask questions or scream or call for help. I grabbed him before I could stop myself. My claw hand covered his mouth while my right arm, still mostly human, wrapped around his torso. I felt the thing inside me surge, felt it extend through my contaminated flesh, felt something pass from me to my son. The kiss. Not mouth to mouth like the thing in the underhive had done to me, but the principle was the same. Genetic material transferred through direct contact, the Xeno's payload injected into a new host, the infection spreading to the next generation. I released him after maybe 10 seconds. He staggered backward, his hand going to his neck where my claw had touched him, his eyes showing fear and confusion and the dawning realization that something terrible had just happened. "Father." His voice was small, childlike, the voice of a boy who just watched his parent transform into something monstrous. "What did you do? What did you do to me?" "I'm sorry," I whispered, and the words felt inadequate, meaningless. I couldn't. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. It's inside you now, the genetic change, the transformation. In 3 months, maybe 6, you'll start to change too. Change into what? He was backing away from me, his body pressed against the wall, trapped in his own quarters with no escape. "Something better," I said, and the words came from somewhere else, from the thing inside me that wore my voice but wasn't entirely me anymore. Something stronger, something that serves a greater purpose. The bloodline continues, the infection spreads, the gene choir grows. The what? Marcus looked like he might vomit. "Father, you're not making sense. You need to report to the Medicae. You need help." "The Medicae will kill me," I said, and that was purely my own voice, my own awareness of the danger. "They'll kill you too once they understand what I've passed to you. We're contaminated now, both of us. There's no going back." I left him there, walked back to my own quarters, tried to sleep but couldn't, the dreams showing me futures I didn't want to see. Marcus changing, my grandchildren being born already corrupted. Generations of my bloodline transforming until they were no longer human at all. The Imperium taught us that the Emperor protects, that faith and loyalty earned divine favor. But where was that protection now? Where was the divine intervention when I'd been infected? When the Xeno's genetic code had rewritten my humanity? When I'd passed that corruption to my own son? The Emperor didn't answer. Never did. never would. Because he was a corpse on a throne, and his protection was propaganda designed to make us compliant, while we suffered and died for an empire that viewed us as expendable resources. I was beginning to understand something the ecclesiarchy never taught, that the gods we prayed to didn't protect us. They just gave us lies to comfort us while we were consumed. Marcus changed more slowly than I had. The infection manifested differently in him, less physical deformity, more psychological alteration. His body remained mostly human for the first 2 years, just small tells, eyes that reflected light with a purple sheen, fingernails that grew faster and harder, a smell about him that was subtly wrong, like chemicals mixed with something organic. But his mind changed faster. He started having the same dreams I'd experienced, the visions of tunnels and chambers, and the vast hunger moving through the stars. He started understanding things he shouldn't. Genetic concepts, biological imperatives, the mechanics of how the Xenos contamination spread through bloodlines. And he started to accept it. Not immediately. There were months where he fought against the changes, where he tried to purge the infection through willpower, or prayer, or desperate self-mutilation that his enhanced healing factor simply repaired. But gradually, incrementally, he stopped resisting. "It's not evil," he told me once, maybe 3 years after his infection. We were in the underhive by then, having fled the manufactorum when his changes became too obvious to hide. The contamination. It's not corruption. It's evolution. We're being improved. "We're being turned into Xenos," I replied, looking at my own body which had continued to transform. I had 4 arms now, the extra limbs having grown over 2 years from nodules on my torso. My skull had elongated, giving me persistent headaches as bone restructured. My skin was more chitin than flesh, purple-gray and hard enough to stop small caliber rounds. "Human is just one form," Marcus said, and his voice had that quality I'd learned to recognize. The thing inside him speaking through him, using his mouth to express thoughts that weren't entirely his own. "We're becoming something greater. Can you feel it, Father? The connection, the gene choir." I could feel it. That was the horrible truth. I could sense other infected individuals scattered through the hive. Not directly, not like Vox communication, but as a subtle awareness, like knowing where your own limbs were without looking. The infection created a network, linking contaminated humans into a collective consciousness that transcended individual identity. By year 5, there were 12 of us in our small group, hiding in the abandoned sections of the underhive. Workers I'd infected directly or through intermediate contacts, each one carrying the genetic payload and transforming at their own pace. We called ourselves the Children of Salvation, a name that came from the dreams, from the shared consciousness that linked us. We believed we were blessed. That's how insidious it was. The infection didn't just change our bodies, it rewrote our perception of reality, made us interpret our transformation as divine favor rather than Xenos contamination. We looked at our mutations and saw improvement. We felt the gene choir's whispers and called it enlightenment. We waited in the darkness for something we didn't yet understand and named that waiting faith. The Imperium teaches that Xenos corruption destroys the soul, that contamination is damnation. But from inside the infection, it felt like the opposite. It felt like waking up, like seeing clearly for the first time, like discovering that everything we'd been taught was a lie designed to keep us ignorant and compliant. They told us the Emperor protects, I said once during a gathering of our little cult. But he never answered our prayers. We worked ourselves to death in his manufactorums. We died in his wars. We suffered in his name. And for what? Where was his protection when we were infected? Where was his intervention when the contamination spread? Murmurs of agreement from the others, their mutated faces showing expressions human anatomy couldn't quite manage anymore. But the star gods will answer, someone said. Another corrupted worker whose name I'd forgotten, whose identity had been partially subsumed into the collective. They're coming, the dreams show us. The great ones who travel between worlds, who consume and transform, who bring true unity, they will protect us, they will save us. This was the lie we told ourselves. The same pattern as imperial faith, just with different names. We'd stopped believing in the corpse emperor and started believing in something worse. In the hive fleet we'd seen in our dreams, in the tyrannids we didn't yet have words for, in the vast, hungry intelligence that viewed us not as worshippers, but as food. But we couldn't see it yet. The infection was too thorough, the psychological conditioning too complete. We interpreted the genetic imperatives as spiritual calling, mistook biological compulsion for divine communion. Marcus had a son by year 8. The partner was another infected worker, a young person whose name was Davius and whose transformation had manifested as enhanced pheromone production, a mutation that made breeding more likely, that ensured the contamination would spread through reproduction as well as direct infection. The child was born already changed, not dramatically, no extra limbs or obvious deformities, but subtly. Purple-tinged skin, eyes that tracked movement with inhuman precision, bone structure that was slightly wrong, proportions that suggested the Xenos template more than human genetics. We called him Marcus. A continuation of the name, a passing of identity from grandfather to son. But he wasn't my grandson, not really. He was the third generation of infection, the result of 2 contaminated bloodlines combining, the genetic payload expressing more strongly with each iteration. He was something new, something that had never existed before. A hybrid born from corrupted human stock, carrying the Xenos genetic code in every cell, human enough to survive in a human environment, but alien enough that he would never truly be one of us. He's perfect, Marcus said, holding the infant with his partially mutated hands, looking at the child with eyes that no longer fully resembled human organs. Look at him, Father. This is what we're becoming. This is the future of our bloodline. I looked at my grandson and felt horror, warring with pride. Horror, because I could see what he was, what he would become, the full extent of the transformation that would accelerate with each generation. Pride, because he was strong, healthy, adapted to thrive in conditions that would kill a normal human. The infection had made me a monster, but it had also made my bloodline resilient in ways the Imperium's propaganda could never match. The Emperor demanded sacrifice and gave nothing in return. The star gods, as we'd started calling them in our delusion, demanded transformation but rewarded us with strength. It was a trade, a terrible trade. But we were too corrupted to see it for what it was. By year 15, our cult had grown to 47 members. We'd spread through the underhive like a whispered secret, infecting workers and refugees and anyone desperate enough to accept the blessing we offered. Each new member brought their family lines into the fold, their children carrying the genetic payload forward, the contamination spreading exponentially through the hive's lower population. We'd built something in the depths, a community, a network, a structure that mimicked human society but served inhuman purposes. We worked together to survive. We shared resources. We protected each other from the Arbites and the gang violence and the industrial accidents that claimed so many in the Underhive. And we waited, because the dreams showed us that something was coming, that our transformation had purpose, that we were being prepared for a reunion with something vast and terrible and divine. We called it salvation. We believed it was love. We were taught by genetic imperatives to view our consumption as communion, to interpret our doom as destiny, to welcome the very thing that would destroy us. The infection was that thorough. The psychological conditioning was that complete. We'd become exactly what the Xenos wanted, willing victims, infected hosts who would sabotage our own species, who would work against humanity's survival while believing we were serving a higher purpose. Marcus died in year 15, not from the transformation. His body had adapted, stabilized, become something that could theoretically survive indefinitely. He died in a confrontation with an Arbites patrol that had ventured too deep into the Underhive, searching for a missing administratum clerk we'd infected 3 months prior. They shot him 17 times. His body absorbed the first 12 rounds, the chitin-reinforced skeletal structure and redundant organs keeping him functional despite catastrophic damage. But the last 5 were incendiary rounds, designed to burn through armor, and his flesh couldn't regenerate faster than it could burn. I held him as he died. His partially human face looked up at me, his 3 eyes, a third had grown during year 9, showing pain and confusion, and, at the end, a strange peace. "The star gods will protect us," he whispered, blood bubbling from his mouth. Blood that was no longer entirely red, but had a purple tinge that marked it as other. "When they come, when they arrive, we'll be saved." "Yes," I lied, because what else could I say to my dying son? That there was no salvation, that the star gods would consume us just as readily as they would consume any other biomass, that our faith was genetic programming disguised as spirituality. He died believing the lie. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe that was all any of us could hope for, to die believing that our suffering had meaning, that our transformation had purpose, that someone or something valued our existence. The Emperor didn't protect him. The star gods didn't save him. He just died, another casualty in an eternal war, his body burned and his gene seed, if he'd had such a thing, lost forever. But Marcus survived. My grandson, 8 years old, already showing the accelerated development that came with third-generation infection. He watched his father die, processed the information with a mind that were partially Xenos, and came to his own conclusions. "The humans killed him," Marcus said later, his child's voice carrying a cold analysis that no child should possess. "They fear what they don't understand. They destroy what threatens their order. We must hide deeper, spread wider, wait longer, until we're strong enough that they can't stop us." He was right, and that terrified me more than anything. That my 8-year-old grandson had the tactical awareness and long-term thinking to plan a multi-generational strategy for species corruption. The infection was accelerating. Each generation it expressed more strongly, more quickly, more completely. And I was the origin point, the first carrier, the original sinner, the one who damned an entire bloodline through a single moment of bad luck in the underhive depths. I was 104 years old, and I'd been infected for 15 years, and I couldn't die. The transformation had made me functionally immortal. My body continuously regenerating, my organs redundant and resilient, my consciousness trapped in flesh that wouldn't let me escape through death. I tried once, in year 12, threw myself into an industrial smelter, hoping the heat would finally end it. My body burned, the flesh melting away, the pain beyond description. But my enhanced biology kept my brain functional for the 7 minutes it took to reduce me to carbonized matter. And then I regenerated, grew back from the remains over 6 weeks of agony, flesh rebuilding itself according to the Xenos template, consciousness restored but memories of the burning preserved with perfect clarity. I couldn't die, couldn't escape, could only continue, watching my bloodline transform, seeing my great-grandchildren born already monstrous, knowing that I'd created a lineage of abominations that would spread through the hive like a cancer. The Emperor protects, they'd told me in the Schola Progenium, in the Ecclesiarchy sermons, in the propaganda broadcasts that echoed through the Manufactorum. He didn't. He never had. I'd been infected, transformed, and damned without any divine intervention whatsoever. And now I was functionally eternal, trapped in a body that couldn't die, waiting for a salvation that was really just consumption disguised as communion. This was my existence. This was my punishment. This was the truth beneath the lies we'd been taught, that there was no protection, no salvation, no divine plan. Just biology, just chemistry, just genetic imperatives that wore the mask of spirituality to make us compliant. Marcus grew fast, not just physically, though his body developed at a rate that would have alarmed any Medicae who saw him, but mentally. By age 12, he had the tactical awareness of a veteran soldier. By age 16, he was leading our cult with strategic brilliance that would have impressed an imperial commander. He was born infected, born changed, born with the Xenos genetic code fully integrated into his biology. He'd never been human, not really, and that gave him a clarity the first and second generations lacked. He didn't mourn what he'd lost because he'd never had it to lose. "Grandfather," he said once when he was 14 but looked 20 and thought like someone with decades of combat experience. "You still think of yourself as human. You still carry grief for what you were. But I was never human. I don't mourn it. I don't miss it. I am what I am, and what I am is better." Better, that word haunted me. Better at what? Survival, violence, service to something inhuman. He was stronger than baseline humans, faster, more resilient. His forearms gave him advantages in combat. His chitinous skin could stop blades. His mind could process tactical situations with inhuman speed. But he'd lost something too. Lost the capacity for certain emotions, for moral reasoning, for the small kindnesses that made humanity worth preserving. He was efficient, practical, ruthlessly focused on cult expansion and genetic propagation. He was a weapon that thought it was a person, a tool that believed it had free will. Under his leadership, the cult exploded. By year 25, he was 18, I was 118, We had over 300 members scattered through 6 sub-levels. By year 35, over 1,000. By year 40, the Arbits estimated, though they didn't know the true scale, that nearly 15% of the Underhive population carried the genetic payload in some stage of expression. We'd become a shadow society, a hidden nation within the hive, spreading through bloodlines and infections, waiting for the reunion the dreams promised. Marcus had 6 children by different partners, each one chosen for genetic compatibility, each pregnancy resulting in 4th-generation hybrids that were barely recognizable as human. They were born with purple skin and extra limbs and skulls already elongated, born ready to serve purposes they wouldn't understand for decades. I watched my great-grandchildren and felt despair mixed with horrified fascination. They were beautiful in an alien way, perfectly adapted organisms, optimized for survival in environments that would kill baseline humans, shaped by Xenos genetics to serve as nodes in a collective consciousness that spanned light years. But they weren't my family anymore. They were iterations of genetic code, biological mechanisms wearing the appearance of children, tools being prepared for a purpose none of us fully understood yet. "The star gods are close," Marcus announced in year 42. He was 30. I was 145, and the dreams had intensified. We could all feel it now, the gene choir screaming in our minds, the biological imperative that drove us to prepare, to gather, to wait for the arrival that would either save us or consume us. 3 years, maybe 5. But they're coming. The cult celebrated. 45 years of waiting, of hiding, of slowly corrupting the hive from within, and finally the promised communion was approaching. Finally, we would meet the star gods we'd worshipped without ever seeing, the great ones who would recognize our transformation and accept us as their children. We were taught to call it faith. The ecclesiarchy preached faith in the emperor, claimed that belief would earn protection. We'd simply transferred that faith to something else, called the Xenos overlords gods instead of parasites, interpreted our genetic programming as spiritual calling. The pattern was identical. The lie was the same, only the names had changed. But we couldn't see it. The infection was too complete. We believed absolutely in our salvation, in our divine purpose, in the loving embrace of the hive mind that was really just hunger, wearing the mask of affection. Marcus spoke to the cult that night, his 4 arms raised in a gesture that mimicked human blessing, but came from Xenos instinct, his elongated skull and purple skin marking him as obviously inhuman to anyone who looked. "Brothers and sisters," he said, and I noticed he used family terminology, even though most of us weren't related by blood anymore. The infection had become our shared lineage, our genetic bond. We have waited generations for this moment. Our ancestors suffered in ignorance, serving a corpse god who never answered their prayers, dying in manufactorums and battlefields without purpose or recognition. But we are different. We are blessed. We are chosen. Murmurs of agreement from the assembled cult members, hundreds of mutated humans packed into a chamber deep in the underhive, their bodies showing every stage of transformation from subtle changes to complete hybridization. "The Imperium teaches that we are corrupted," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the resonance of multiple vocal cords, the Xenos' genetic modifications giving him a natural authority that commanded attention. "They call us Xenos, call us tainted, call us abominations worthy only of death. But they are wrong. We are not corrupted. We are evolved. We are not tainted. We are purified. We are not abominations. We are the future. This was the lie speaking through him, the genetic programming that made us interpret our doom as destiny, that made us view consumption as communion, that transformed victims into willing participants in their own destruction. When the star gods arrive, Marcus said, we will greet them as family. We will show them what we've become, what we've sacrificed, how we've prepared ourselves to join them, and they will accept us. They will take us into their embrace. They will make us truly theirs. The cult erupted in celebration, hissing and clicking, and vocalizations that were barely language anymore. Sounds produced by vocal structures that had been reshaped by the Xenos template. They believed every word, believed absolutely in the promised salvation. I wanted to warn them, wanted to tell them that the star gods weren't saviors, but predators, that the hive mind didn't love us, but simply viewed us as useful tools, that our communion would be digestion and our embrace would be consumption. But I couldn't speak the warning because I believed it too. The infection had rewritten my perception so completely that even knowing intellectually what was happening, I couldn't emotionally reject it. The genetic imperatives overrode conscious thought, made my body crave what my mind knew would destroy me. This was the horror of the Xenos contamination, not that it changed your body, but that it changed your mind in ways that made you complicit in your own doom, that made you work toward your own destruction while calling it salvation. Marcus finished his speech and the cult dispersed, each member returning to their hiding places in the underhive, continuing their work of infection and corruption, spreading the genetic payload through violence or seduction or simple contact, preparing the hive for invasion from within. I stayed behind in the empty chamber, my forearms wrapped around my malformed torso, my elongated skull aching from the constant pressure of bone restructuring that would never quite finish. 75 years infected. 117 years old, and I couldn't remember my father's face anymore. Couldn't remember Marcus as he'd been before the kiss. Couldn't remember being human beyond the intellectual awareness that I'd once been something different. The infection had eaten my memories along with my humanity, had digested my identity and replaced it with Xeno's imperative dressed up as purpose. The Emperor protects. I whispered to the empty chamber, the phrase coming automatically, a reflex beaten into me during childhood that even 75 years of transformation couldn't fully erase. But I knew it was a lie. Had always known, even when I'd believed it. The Emperor didn't protect. The star gods wouldn't save us. There was no divine plan, no cosmic purpose, no meaning beyond biology and chemistry, and the simple truth that predators evolved to make prey complicit in their own consumption. We were food that had learned to cook itself, and in 3 to 5 years, the feast would begin. The sky screamed. Not literally, the underhive was too deep to see sky, and the upper spire's atmospheric processes filtered out most sound from beyond the planet. But we felt it anyway, through the gene choir, through the psychic connection that linked every infected hybrid across the hive. The hive fleet had entered the system, and its presence resonated through every cell that carried the genetic payload. Marcus was 48 years old, but looked 60, and moved like something that had never been human. I was 133, my body a patchwork of Xeno's adaptations and human remnants, my consciousness barely recognizable as the Hadrian Voss who'd worked Press 7 Gamma 9 decades ago. The cult had swelled to over 15,000 members by that point. 15,000 hybrids of varying generations, spreading through the underhive and the lower hive levels, hiding in plain sight among the billions who didn't know they were already compromised. We were an army waiting for a signal, a weapon pointed at humanity's heart, ready to fire when the hive mind commanded. The signal came 3 days after the sky screamed. It wasn't sound or language. It was pure biological imperative transmitted through the gene choir. A command coded directly into our genetic structure, impossible to resist or ignore. Every hybrid felt it simultaneously, 15,000 minds receiving the same instruction. Rise. Gather. Prepare. We rose. Emerged from our hiding places in the underhive, from our disguises among the worker population, from the shadows where we'd waited for 75 years. We moved through the hive levels like a flood, overwhelming the Arbit's checkpoints, brushing aside PDF resistance, killing anyone who tried to stop us. Not because we were violent, not because we wanted to, but because the imperative commanded it, and our bodies obeyed genetic code the way servitors obeyed programming. We were biological machines acting out instructions written in DNA by an intelligence that viewed us as tools. Marcus led the advance. His 4 arms wielded weapons stolen from Arbites, laser guns, autoguns, simple tools of violence. But he also wielded something else, a command presence that made other hybrids follow him instinctively, a pheromone signature that identified him as Alpha, as leader, as the node through which the hive mind's will would be expressed. I followed because I had no choice. The imperative overrode conscious will, made my transformed body move according to Xeno's purpose, regardless of what the tiny human remnant of my consciousness wanted. We fought our way through 30 hive levels in 2 days. The PDF threw everything they had at us: laser guns, flamers, heavy bolters. Thousands of hybrids died, their bodies torn apart by explosive rounds or immolated by promethium flames. But thousands more kept coming, and we were strong, resilient, adapted to survive damage that would kill baseline humans. I took 17 laser gun hits during the assault, felt the beams burn through my chitin armor, felt my flesh cook and organs rupture. But my redundant biology kept me functional, kept me moving, and my enhanced healing closed the wounds over hours rather than days. I couldn't die, couldn't stop, could only continue forward, following the imperative, climbing toward the upper levels where the spaceport was, where the final stage of this 75-year plan would be executed. On the second day, we reached sub-level 50, deep enough to still be considered lower hive, but high enough that we could see the upper spires through the atmospheric processors, could see the defensive batteries firing into space, could watch the Navy ships engaging the hive fleet beyond the planet's orbit. The Navy was losing. Even I, with no military training beyond what the infection had granted me, could see it. The Tyrannid ships were vast, organic constructs that absorbed damage and regenerated, that fielded living weapons against metal and void shields. For every Xeno's ship destroyed, 2 more emerged from the warp, and the Navy's defensive line was collapsing. "They're coming," Marcus said, standing beside me at a blown-out viewport, his 3 eyes tracking the distant battle with inhuman precision. The star gods, The great devourer. Our family. They'll kill us, I said, and the words came from the small human part still trapped inside this Xeno's body. You know that, don't you? When they arrive, when they descend to the planet, they won't distinguish between hybrid and human. We're all just biomass to them, all just food. Marcus turned to look at me, and his expression was beatific, the look of a saint witnessing divine revelation. Yes, he said simply, we are food, but we are family too. We will be consumed, but we will also become part of something greater. Our biomass will be absorbed. Our genetic code will be integrated. We will continue, not as individuals, but as cells in the hive mind's body. This was the final lie, the ultimate rationalization. We would be eaten, and we'd learn to call it communion. We would be digested, and we'd learn to call it transformation. We would cease to exist as conscious entities, and we'd learned to call it transcendence. The infection had programmed us so thoroughly that we welcomed our own destruction, that we worked toward our own annihilation while believing it was salvation. The Emperor protects, I said, bitter irony making the phrase almost painful. That's what they taught us in the ecclesiarchy. That faith would save us, that service would be rewarded, that suffering had purpose. They lied, Marcus said. But so did we. We told ourselves the star gods would protect us, that our transformation had meaning, that our waiting would be rewarded. Different names, same lie. I looked at my grandson, my great-grandson by blood, my brother in infection, my fellow victim of Xeno's contamination, and realized he understood, had always understood. The infection had made him ruthlessly clear-sighted about what we were, what we'd become, what would happen to us. You knew, I said. You knew we'd be consumed. You knew the communion was really just digestion. You knew, and you still led them here. Yes, Marcus said, because the alternative was worse. We could have died as humans, alone and meaningless, our suffering serving an empire that viewed us as ammunition. Or we could die as this, transformed, connected, part of something vast, even if that something only values us as nutrients. At least this death serves a purpose, even if the purpose is just feeding something greater than ourselves. This was the horror at the infection's core. Not that it changed you, but that it gave you just enough awareness to understand your doom while making you unable to resist it, unable to even want to resist it, making you complicit in your own consumption while making you believe it was choice rather than compulsion. The Hive Fleet entered orbit 8 hours later. The spores fell like snow. Mycetic spores, the Imperium called them, biological drop pods that the Hive Fleet seeded across the planet, each one containing tyrannid organisms ready to consume everything organic they encountered. They looked like meteors at first, burning through the atmosphere, but as they got closer, you could see they were alive, pulsing, breathing, oozing fluids from pores in their chitinous shells. The Hive's void shields tried to intercept them. Defensive batteries fired frantically into the descending swarm, but there were too many, coming too fast, spreading across too wide an area. The shields overloaded. The batteries melted from sustained firing, and the spores landed. We felt the impact through the gene choir. Not physical vibration, but psychic resonance. The hive mind's children touching the planet and beginning the consumption. We felt their hunger like our own hunger, felt their purpose like our own purpose. felt the overwhelming imperative to gather and consume and grow. Marcus led us to the spaceport. 15,000 hybrids moving through the hive in a coordinated swarm, killing anyone who resisted, but mostly just flowing around at resistance like water around stones. We didn't need to fight anymore. The real weapons were descending from orbit, and we were just the preparation, the infiltration, the cancer that weakens the body before the infection arrives. The Tyranids were already at the spaceport when we arrived. Hundreds of them, hormagaunts, termagants, warriors, and larger things I didn't have names for. They moved with coordinated precision, their actions guided by the same hive mind that controlled us, the same intelligence that had spent 75 years preparing this moment. I expected them to attack us, expected them to view us as prey, to fall upon us with claws and talons and the mindless hunger the Imperium's propaganda had always described. But they didn't. They recognized us. The gene choir surged, the connection between hybrid and pure-strain Tyranid establishing itself, and I felt the hive mind's attention focus on us. Not as individuals, never as individuals, but as a collective, as a tool it had created, as a weapon it had deployed. And in that moment, I understood. We'd never been the infection's victims. We'd been its strategy. The genetic payload wasn't a disease that accidentally spread. It was a weapon deliberately deployed, designed to create hybrid populations that would weaken target civilizations from within, that would sabotage defenses and gather intelligence and prepare worlds for invasion. We'd been soldiers all along, just not for the side we'd thought we served. "Come," something said. Not spoken, communicated directly through the gene choir. Thoughts transmitted from the hive mind through its pure-strain servants to us hybrids. Come to communion, come to unity, come to consumption. Marcus walked forward. No hesitation, no fear, just obedience to the imperative coded into his genetics. The other hybrids followed, 15,000 mutated humans moving toward the Tyranid swarm, toward the consumption we'd been raised to believe was salvation. I wanted to run, wanted to resist, wanted to do anything except walk toward my own death. But my body moved without conscious input, following the genetic commands that overrode will and reason and self-preservation instinct. The first hybrid reached the Tyranid line. A young person, maybe 16, third-generation infection, barely recognizable as human. A hormagaunt approached them, and for a moment they stood facing each other. Xenos and hybrid, predator and prey, family reunited after 75 years of separation. Then the hormagaunt's claws flashed, and the hybrid fell in 3 pieces, their body already being digested by bioacids before they hit the ground. "No!" someone screamed. Not me. I'd lost the capacity for vocal objection years ago. But someone in the cult, some hybrid who'd retained enough human awareness to understand what was happening, to see through the lies we'd told ourselves. The consumption had begun. The Tyranids didn't discriminate between hybrid and baseline human, didn't recognize us as allies or family or anything except biomass. They fell upon us with the same mindless efficiency they applied to every meal, their claws and talons and bioweapons reducing flesh to component nutrients, their digestion pools breaking down bodies into raw genetic material. We were being eaten, and the gene choir sang with joy. That was the final horror. The genetic programming was so complete that even as we died, even as we were literally being consumed, our minds interpreted it as communion, as unity, as the transcendence we'd been promised. The pain was ecstasy. The death was transformation. The annihilation was apotheosis. I felt Marcus die through the gene choir, felt his body torn apart by a tyrannid warrior's talons, felt his consciousness dissolve as his brain was consumed, felt the genetic code he'd carried absorbed into the Hive Fleet's biomass to be reused, repurposed, integrated into future organisms. He died believing he'd been saved. Died thinking his consumption was communion. Died as deluded as every cult member who'd followed him into this slaughter. A Hormagaunt came for me. I watched it approach with 3 eyes that no longer blinked, with a consciousness that could no longer produce fear, with a body that couldn't run even if the imperative allowed it. Its claws punched through my torso. All 4 arms, simultaneous strikes, precise and efficient. I felt my organs rupture, felt my redundant biology try to compensate, felt my enhanced healing begin the futile work of repairing damage too extensive to survive. But I didn't die. My body wouldn't let me. The transformation had made me too resilient, too adapted, too functional. I remained conscious even as my organs spilled from my body cavity, even as the Hormagaunt began feeding, even as I was literally being eaten alive. This was the curse of the infection. It made you hard to kill even when killing was mercy. It kept you aware through traumas that should have granted unconsciousness. It preserved consciousness right up until the brain itself was consumed. I saw 15,000 hybrids die that day, watched my bloodline, my son, my grandson, my great-grandchildren, get reduced to nutrients and genetic code. Watched the cult that had believed so absolutely in salvation discover that their communion was just consumption with a prettier name. The Imperium had lied when they said the Emperor protects. But we'd lied too when we said the star gods would save us. Different names, different promises, same betrayal, same meaningless suffering and death in service to powers that viewed us as ammunition or nutrients or tools. The Hormagaunt finished feeding and moved on. I lay in a pool of my own fluids, my body somehow still alive despite damage that should have been fatal. My consciousness trapped in flesh that refused to die. I lay there for 3 days. 3 days of watching the consumption continue around me. 3 days of feeling hybrids die through the gene choir until the network went silent as the last infected human was processed. 3 days of tyrannid organisms stepping over my body, ignoring me because I was already broken, already dying, too damaged to be worth the effort of further consumption. On the 3rd day, Imperial forces retook the spaceport. The Navy had regrouped in orbit, had driven off the Hive Fleet's vanguard, had deployed Space Marines to reclaim key locations. I watched from my position on the ground as Ultramarines in pristine blue armor methodically exterminated every tyrannid organism they found, their bolters speaking the Imperium's absolute rejection of Xenos contamination. They found me in the aftermath, recognized what I was, a hybrid, corrupted beyond salvation, contaminated to the genetic level. An apothecary examined me with instruments that hummed and chimed, documenting my mutations, my adaptations, the extent of my transformation. "Still alive," he said to his battle brothers, his voice filtered through his helmet and tinged with disgust. "Extensive Xenos corruption, but consciousness appears intact. The hybrid survived consumption. Unusual. worth studying. Purge it, another Marine said. Xenos filth deserves only cleansing fire. The biologies will want samples, the apothecary countered. Living specimens this corrupted are rare. We'll transport it to the research facility, extract what data we can, then purge. They put me in stasis, froze my dying body in temporal suspension, preserved my consciousness in the amber of stopped time. When I woke, I was in a laboratory. Clean white walls instead of the spaceport's blood-soaked ferrocrete. Imperial Aquilas instead of Xenos organisms. Human voices speaking high Gothic instead of the Gene Choir's alien harmonies. They studied me for 7 years. Extracted tissue samples. Mapped my corrupted genetics. Documented the stages of hybrid transformation. Tried to understand how the infection worked, how it spread, how to counter it in future invasions. I couldn't speak. My vocal cords were too damaged, too transformed, but I was aware. Conscious. Trapped in a body that wouldn't die, and a mind that couldn't escape, forced to witness every dissection, every sample extraction, every clinical discussion of my mutations. The apothecaries asked questions I couldn't answer. The biologist tech priests performed procedures that caused agony I couldn't voice. And through it all, I remained aware, conscious, alive in the technical sense, even though everything that had made me human was long gone. After 7 years, they decided I had no more data to yield. Signed the extermination order. Prepared the Prometheum flames that would finally end my 162 years of existence. I felt relief for the first time in decades. Finally, death. Finally, ending. Finally, cessation of consciousness and awareness and the horrible trapped eternity I'd endured. But they didn't burn me. At the last moment, an inquisitor arrived. Someone high-ranking enough that even the Space Marines deferred to their authority. Examined me with eyes that had seen too much corruption and survived too many horrors. This hybrid is functionally immortal, they announced. Its enhanced biology prevents death from age or injury. Its consciousness remains intact despite extreme trauma. It is a unique specimen, one that could provide data for centuries if properly maintained. You want to keep it alive? The apothecary sounded uncertain. Indefinitely. Place it in isolation, the Inquisitor ordered. Minimum life support, sensory deprivation, temporal suspension when needed. Study it annually. Monitor for changes. This specimen represents 75 years of Xenos corruption. It may yet yield insights into Tyranid infiltration strategies. They put me in a cell. 3 meters square, no windows, no stimulation, kept my body alive with nutrient drips and forced respiration, left me in darkness with nothing but my thoughts and the memories that were slowly, inexorably dissolving as my corrupted neurons misfired and degraded. That was 60 years ago. I am 222 years old now. I have been a hybrid longer than I was human, have been imprisoned longer than I was free, have been conscious longer than any human should have to endure. I cannot die, cannot escape, cannot do anything except exist in this darkness, remembering a life I no longer fully recall, mourning a humanity I can barely conceptualize, aware that this is eternal, that the Imperium will keep me alive and trapped and conscious for centuries more, extracting whatever data they deem valuable while I rot from within in ways that never quite kill me. The Emperor protects, they told me when I was 12 years old, working Press 7 Gamma on sub-level 219. He didn't protect me from infection. Didn't protect my son from transformation. Didn't protect my bloodline from corruption. Didn't protect 15,000 hybrids from consumption. Didn't protect me from this eternal imprisonment. The star gods would save us, Marcus preached before leading the cult to their deaths. They didn't save anyone. Just consumed what was offered, digested what was useful, and moved on to the next meal. No communion, no transcendence, no meaning, just biology doing what biology does. Predators feeding on prey stupid enough to walk into the mouth willingly. Both were lies. Different lies, different names, but the same fundamental betrayal. Powers that demanded faith and service and sacrifice while offering nothing in return except suffering and death and meaningless existence. I am still alive, still conscious, still aware, and I will never die. This is my eternity. This is my damnation. This is the truth they don't tell you when they preach about faith and duty and divine purpose. That sometimes there is no death, no ending, no relief. Sometimes you just continue, trapped in flesh that won't fail and consciousness that won't fade, existing without purpose or hope or even the basic mercy of cessation. My name was Hadrian Voss. I worked Press 7 Gamma on sub-level 219. I had a father whose hands were scarred from 40 years at the same press. I had a son I loved more than the rhythm of the machines. And I damned them all. My son, my grandson, my great-grandchildren, 15,000 souls, to transformation and consumption and meaningless death in service to powers that didn't care. I am still alive. I wish I wasn't. But wishing changes nothing. The machine continues to stamp. The cycle continues to turn, and I continue to exist, eternal and aware and damned. 75 years infected, plus 60 years. Imprisoned equals eternity in the manufactorum on Salvaris Hive. Sub-level 219, Press Station 7 Gamma, runs continuously. The worker currently assigned to it is named Jericho. He is 40 years old. His father worked the same press before him, and his son will inherit it when he dies. He doesn't know about the hybrid cult that nearly destroyed the hive 75 years ago. The administratum purged those records, declared the entire incident classified at the highest levels. The infection never happened. The consumption never occurred. The hive fleet was just a minor Xenos incursion, successfully repelled, nothing to concern the loyal citizens. Jericho works his shift, feeds metal into the press, watches it stamp hull plating for Navy frigates. He believes the Emperor protects. He attends the monthly ecclesiarchy services. He teaches his son the same faith he was taught, the same lies that have sustained the Imperium for 10,000 years. He doesn't know that in an inquisitorial facility 3 systems away, something that used to be human continues to exist in perpetual darkness. Doesn't know that hybrid remains immortal and aware, trapped in an eternal present without past or future. Consciousness preserved, but purpose long since extinguished. He doesn't know that the hive fleet is still out there, moving between systems, seeding genetic payloads on thousands of worlds, preparing invasions that won't bear fruit for generations. That somewhere, another worker is being kissed by something alien. That somewhere, another infection is beginning. The cycle continues. The machine grinds on. The Imperium consumes its own while preaching protection. The Tyranids consume everything while wearing the mask of divine hunger. And in between, individuals suffer and die and exist without meaning. Their faith betrayed, their service unrewarded, their consciousness trapped in systems that view them as resources rather than people. There is no salvation, no divine plan, no cosmic purpose, just biology and chemistry, and the simple truth that both the Emperor and the star gods are lies we tell ourselves to make the suffering bearable. Jericho doesn't know any of this. He just works his press, feeds metal into the machine, and believes the promises he's being taught. In 60 years, maybe 70, his great-grandson will be infected. The genetic corruption will spread through his bloodline across 4 generations. And when the Hive Fleet returns to finish what it started, that great-grandson will lead a new cult to their consumption, believing absolutely in salvation that will never come. The cycle continues. It always continues. Welcome to the Imperium. Welcome to the Great Devourer. Welcome to forever. My name was Hadrian Voss. I am still alive, and I will never be free.